It's a tough gig doing the post-lunch time slot, so hopefully the esteemed panel that sits beside me will be able to keep you awake and interested. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today, the Ngunnawal people, and thank them for their custodianship. I would like to acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. In front of me, well, beside me, from your left to right, is Cheryl Pollard, Program Manager, Canberra Business Chamber, Cliff Billam, Assistant Secretary of the Labour Market and Migration Branch, Jobs and Skills Australia, Chris Deeble, Deputy Secretary of the Capability Acquisition and Sustainment Group, Defence Australia, Prue Slaughter, CEO, Mental Illness Education ACT, and James Bawtry, CEO of PM Logic. In the interest of time, I haven't read out their bios. They are very extensive and impressive, so please check out the program and you can read all about them. We've only got an hour, so time is of the essence. I am going to be very strict with time. But without further ado, we'll go to James for the first question. How do you address unconscious biases in your leadership, and how does inclusive leadership help dismantle gender biases in project management?
Thanks, Fleur, and thanks very much for having me today. It's a real privilege, and I'm really grateful to be able to be on this stage with such amazing people in this room. And just a bit of a story before. So one of the things I have done and been fortunate enough to do, I was the New South Wales president for AIPM for a couple of semesters. And I remember seeing these International Women's Days events before I was president, thinking, I can't attend these because obviously I'm a male, not a female, therefore I'm not welcome. And the first one I attended as president to support it, I was so welcome. So thank you very much for welcoming me here today. It's great to be an uplifter, I think Connie mentioned this morning, as a supporter of females and diversity in general, which brings me on to my response to the question around biases. So I think there's three main things I'd like to share with you around biases. The first is self-awareness. So a lot of people go through life like a blunt instrument. They're unconscious. They're not aware of the impact they have on others. And I think it's really important to reflect on how you can actually influence, how your influence has an impact on others. You think about a NASA story, if we go with the space theme. So there's a good picture, I think, of one of the presidents, US presidents, shaking the janitor's hand and talking about the importance the janitor had in having that rocket go to space. So it's the same when I think about a team. Everybody's really important. So there shouldn't be a bias, my bias, around somebody who's a leader being more important than somebody who is doing some hard work. We're all the same, ultimately. We're all human beings. So self-awareness is the first one. Second is education. So biases is a big topic, and I teach at a number of different universities, one of them being UTS, and there I teach in leading projects and organizations. And the topic that I teach is actually biases, and I show the students 50 different types of biases, and that's just a small subset of the biases out there. And we go through it as a cohort, and we talk about their biases, which ones do they identify with, and more importantly, which ones do they see their team identify with as well, and so that they can actually address it and start to work towards improving understanding and be more conscious around each other's biases. The final one is feedback. So it's really important, in my view, to ensure you get honest feedback. And the only way to do that, and we heard about it this morning, is empowering your team, allowing them to provide that feedback to support you ultimately as a leader, or if you're in a team environment, supporting your leader. So feedback for me is critical to overcoming biases. So I think from an advice perspective, create a safe environment. And again, we've heard a lot about this morning. Implement a bias interpreter. So allow that safe word or whatever it is, that cue that if somebody has got a biased view, that you can actually stop that or at least call it out. So there's an awareness there. And then the final one is continuous learning. So when I teach at UTS, I mentioned, and other universities, I probably learn just as much as the students as well, particularly around biases, because it always is interesting. They come up with new things and I learn, oh, okay, am I biased in that premise as well? So that's probably my three on that. I think, Chris, you're next up on the list.
Yes, thanks, James. And I love that point about being self-aware. Worked for many leaders who lack that self-awareness. It's very important. Chris, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, look, I think, all of the things that James just said is true, but I'll add a little bit more. One of the best traits of a leader is humility, understanding what you don't know, being prepared to listen to others and to learn from them. And, that makes you a better person. Humility is about also listening more. It's easy as a leader to assume that you're the font of all knowledge, that you are the one that people will always look to, when in fact the art of being a good leader is letting others lead at various points in time as well. But I think the third one that I would add to this is courage. We talk about courage and, I served in the military for 37 years. It's easy to assume that's about being on the battlefield and, that classical view of courage. But courage in a modern workplace is courage to call out bad behaviour, courage to call out unacceptable things that are said by people or otherwise. And it's the courage to actually apologise when you've done something wrong. I'm 67 years old. I am a victim of the environment in which I was brought up. But I always find there's times when I know that I've said something wrong and I have to go and apologise for what I've said. I've thought about it. I've realised it was wrong or otherwise. So humility is really important. The listening is important. And the courage to call out bad behaviour. If you walk past it, that's the behaviour that you're going to accept. And making sure that you have the courage to apologise when you've done something wrong.
Thanks, Chris. Cheryl.
Great. Well, look, I think as a leader, it all starts with the awareness and accountability, and I love the word courage. It's about being able to have those tough conversations, welcoming diverse perspectives, and also the feedback that you get back that you might get that makes you feel a bit uncomfortable. I've reflected quite a bit. I was the CEO of a large not-for-profit in Canberra for 20-odd years. We largely recruited women, but I actually at one point actively went out to recruit men because we needed that diversity within the workplace. And through that, I actually set up mentoring programs for these guys because it was such a female-dominated area. We also did training when I think bias and so on was actually not even considered for our support staff who'd go into people's families. And it was around what would you be comfortable, what sort of circumstances you'd be comfortable in going into. And it was always interesting to see who was left standing when we asked various questions about their capacity to be able to go into some, really difficult circumstances. Just as another example, I was recruited to participate on a working group with Cricket Australia because they were trying to look to cricket's future and recognise that they need to be more available and open to the changing landscape of the people that live in Australia. So that was a really interesting experience, lending more from the disability perspective. So, I think we champion diverse voices, we call out bias in real time, and we create equitable opportunities for people.
Thanks, Cheryl. Cliff, the second question. What are you doing today to challenge gender biases in your workplace? And what strategies have you found most effective?
Thanks, Flo. A great question, and one I sit in a very lucky position. My organisation, Jobs and Skills Australia, and our parent agency within the Australian Public Service, for want of a better phrase, the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations actually is in great shape on this front. So we're about 60% female, 40% male through the department, and that's a pretty common spread across all the different more senior and more junior classification levels, to the point where our gender pay gap at the end of the last financial year was bang on zero. That's very unusual though. And so a lot of what we do when we're talking to different industries, different specialisations across the labour market, is we do see some really significant challenges. And even thinking about the public commentary this week around the gender pay gap, how that varies by industry, how that varies across different leadership cohorts is a really salient reminder that there's a lot to go on gender equity. Some of the strategies that I've seen work really well are where you can tie the business imperative to the diversity inclusion lens. There's obviously a very important equity lens, but businesses and organisations, at the end of the day, if you want sustained change, they will do that if they believe it's in their sustained self-interest. Diversity and inclusion, to my mind, is actually a really important element of an attraction and retention strategy. I'm yet to meet an employer who doesn't desperately care about attracting the best possible talent that they can and then retaining them. Just going back to Cheryl's point earlier about feminisation in some parts of the economy, and the flip side, some very male-dominated occupations. So we do analysis of where we see skill shortages. So you hear a lot of public commentary about skill shortages. And what we see is very male-dominated and very female-dominated parts of the labour market are far more likely to have a skill shortage than parts of the economy where you've got a better gender balance, almost a 2-to-1 relationship. And so when we talk to industry leaders, such as CEOs of jobs and skills councils and the like, being able to say to them, well, you've got a shortage of truck drivers. Well, only 6% of them are female, right? So if you can get that, and talking to their CEO and said, like, it's such an obvious point, but if we can make that 15, 20, 30, we might get somewhere. If I flip that and think about primary school teachers, early childhood educators, aged and disabled carers, if you get more men into those care sectors, your chances of actually being able to meet the societal demands enhance. And you could run similar lenses across, age cohorts, culturally and linguistically diverse, people with a disability, First Nations people, almost every diversity lens you like. The broader you can make your talent pool and the better you are at attracting and retaining them, the better off your business is going to be. So the business imperative is really important. The other thing to keep in mind is gender equity does not exist in the workforce alone. There's actually a far more societal lens to that. I was facilitating a panel yesterday for an International Women's Day event. We had Michelle Clark, Director of the Office for Women in Victoria, speak at that. And she talked about the reference man. That's in a situation where, example she gave, like the air conditioner settings in most buildings are set up for a middle-aged white man in a suit. That's how they set the aircon. That's why women in many office buildings are cold. My wife is one of them. Crash test dummies are predominantly set up for men. Like that is the framework. The gaps on trains to platforms are not equipped for getting a pram across them with a young child. There are an almost infinite number of examples where a man, and particularly a middle-aged man, is the reference point for how so much of society has been designed. And so there is a lot of, this is an uncomfortable thing for me to say as a middle-aged white man in a suit, but I have pretty much every possible combination of privilege that I didn't earn and I don't deserve, but it fell in my lap. And you have to be cognizant of all of that, both inside the workplace and the way you think about D&I, but beyond it as well.
Thank you for that very self-aware commentary, Cliff. James, would you like to add to that?
Thanks, Fleur. And certainly I agree with Cliff, and I'd be remiss not to, obviously, given the audience here today. For me, I think we used to live in a male's world. And from what Cliff was saying, I certainly agree. Things, as an engineer, things were designed around that male persona. It has rapidly changed, though. And I know in the work that I do with my team, we're a project management company. We very much focus around making sure we engage with not only the men, but also making sure we're equitable and we're diverse in the engagement. So not only females, but other types of diversity groups as well. And actually that means that we're more successful as a result. So it's not just a numbers game. And I think that's my key point here, that diversity actually improves performance ultimately. And I know I'm probably preaching to everybody, the converted, but there's a lot of good metrics. And so for me, it's got to be data driven. And there's some really good evidence around why should you have a diverse group of people thinking. And if I bring it back to that point around the bias thinking, having that diversity actually reduces that bias, because we think differently, we've been brought up differently, we've been given opportunities or not, as the case might be. So I think when I think about that, there's making sure that there's a balance of employment. And an example that we do when we employ new people is, yes, I'll have an initial conversation with the individual, and then it's team-based. And I ask the team, what do you think to this person? Are they going to fit culturally? So we're going to hire on culture, not on skill. And part of the company that I run is we're a training company. So we can train them up if necessary. We can't train the wrong person, somebody who doesn't have that will, they will fail. So for us, it's making sure culturally we hire the right people. So when I think sort of more broadly around that diversity and the hiring, we have team-based events as well. So I'll initially interview somebody if it's a senior person, then the team will meet the person, and then socially. And this morning I was talking about having a coffee with the person, so it might be coffee or a drink, but we make sure we meet them socially. And actually there's some psychology in having a drink, whether it be a coffee, and actually it reduces the stress for that individual, and it improves, obviously the conversation tends to be more open and honest. Then we look at inclusive practices. So my company, PM Logic, it's called, we're what's called a B Corp. So does anybody know what a B Corp is? No. Oh, there's a couple of hands, good. So a B Corp means we're for purpose. So we stand for being socially active, making sure we are conscious around the way we treat people of all diversities, as well as environmentally focused as well. So we're protecting the planet as we go. So we've been carbon zero for over a couple of years. We're very much focused around those two. And in my own bias, my own view, that's a critical element to make sure we're looking after our people and the planet whilst we're doing all this great work. Pro bono. I learn a lot by doing work with charities, with not-for-profits. And typically they're lovely people as well, because they've got a really strong purpose, strong cause that they're working towards, and I identify with that. So for me, that's one of the recommendations for you. If you're not working with or for not-for-profits, then this is your chance to get involved. And the final one is mentoring. So I mentor a lot of females. For example, I've got a couple of placement students from University of Sydney that spend one semester with my company, and they're learning project management. And that for me gives them a chance to learn on the job. This is what a project looks in the real world as opposed to in the academic world, and it helps them to thrive in their future professions as a project manager.
Thanks, James. And Prue, some last minute thoughts on this question from your perspective, the not-for-profit sector.
I think I'm sitting next to the right person, so I'll just echo, support the not-for-profit. And I am at Mental Illness Education, ACT, which is one of the smallest but still growing not-for-profits in Canberra. But we are really working to decrease the stigma and increase help seeking for the whole community. But I think what I would say as a leader, both in Canberra and any more internationally, I think as leaders, we have to lead from the front and see diversity not as a challenge, but as a strength. If we bring the right people together with the right culture and put that culture first, echoing what James spoke about, culture is the absolute first point of reference for everything that we do. And if we lead with that culture, we get the right people in the room, and then we can lift them up. And keeping that door open as well for those that we're leading in front of is something so important. And I'd also echo the voice of lived experience, particularly in the peer workforce and hearing the authentic voices that are coming forward. If we can listen, actively listen, carefully listen, and take that experience to strengthen our capacity, look at different ways of thinking, a more diverse viewpoint. And just going back to the unconscious bias, there is one quote that I just love to share, that you aren't responsible for your first thought, but you are responsible for your second thought and your first action. So be really kind as leaders, because we all need to. The stats aren't, and it's not a great time. There's things going in the headwinds, but it's something about coming together and lifting us up as a community and as Canberra as well.
Thanks, Prue. And following on from that, the next question, and you may have already covered some of this, but what practical steps can leaders take to foster a culture of diversity and inclusion in leadership roles within project management?
So I will wear my pin on my sleeve as well, but one thing that I firmly believe in is creating safe spaces. And we have to have safe spaces where everyone can be heard and all voices can be shared in a safe way and every voice can be respected. And I think promoting that lived experience voice, it starts with a safe space, and it's something that has to start with recruiting from day one, with mentoring, with creating the culture. And if I think back to some of my work in Cambodia, which I was working in the international development space, and I had to stand up a overnight public health project due to unforeseen international circumstances. And when I was looking at how I could make an impact for the most disadvantaged communities in rural Cambodia, it took a team that came together almost overnight. And yes, I had to bring in international public health medical trained experts. I had to get the team around the groups and everyone there, but the key people that were on the ground were the local community members and leaders who were our connection to reaching out and getting the public health outcomes delivered on the day. Yes, we have funding bodies, but if we are focused on the why and the who and what our end goal is, I think we're bringing the right people in the right way. And I know that even when we're releasing young women who have been sold or freeing kids who were chained up, that is only because of the way that group of people came together in a really safe, trusting environment and creating as leaders a space where people can be listened in all kinds of diversity with all kinds of lenses. That was a program that continues to save lives. And I would just so happen, and I do thank you for this particular question, because I happen to have a communication framework called the Do No Harm Communication Framework. And it is a way around creating safe spaces. And we have principles that have come out of lived experience. We look at the audience. It always starts with the context and purpose. Who are you talking to and what is your key message? And the power of words, and I don't think I need to explain why that is so powerful in the current day, but words can do so much good. And if we can shape our language to respectful language, looking at the lens we're coming at, we've got ways and we've got opportunities that we can share and move forward together. So I think that's probably where I'd start.
Thanks, Prue. Really important points around creating safe spaces, very important for everyone in the workforce. Cheryl, would you like to add to those points?
Yeah, look, just a few points. It's very clear that leaders play a critical role in shaping inclusive culture. And some practical steps, I suppose, around leading by example is the authenticity that we need to demonstrate. We need to be honest. We need to be trustworthy. We need to care about the people that we're working with, that we're supporting, mentoring, and so on. And if we do all of that, I think our workplaces are in a very good place. I might just put another hat on at the moment. I've started in a mentoring program called Fearless Women. And you think, okay, we're talking about our workplaces, but this is about actually girls and young women who are needing a supporting hand by a woman who can just be there to listen to them. So I encourage anyone who's got an interest to look it up, because I do think it's really important, because these young women are our future. Anyway, we need to create pathways for a diverse talent. and we need to embed inclusion in the processes that we have. From policy up front, but also then the procedures and processes that follow, and they sit comfortably together. And so it is about redefining, redoing how the recruitment piece, people sitting at a table so that everyone can have a voice. We all know that there's some people that speak maybe a bit louder, but being able to go around the room and get a very good view of what's happening. Disability, being inclusive of people with disability because they have so much that they can offer. It is about the going from the top down and the bottom up. So we need to have people with disability, people of all diverse backgrounds in leadership roles so that their voices can be heard and it can be embedded into whatever business you're in, and that's to a better outcome for the business.
Thanks, Cheryl. And Cliff, would you like to close out this question?
I don't have a huge amount to add to really fantastic contributions from Prue and Cheryl, but I just want to come back to one point, and Chris, you touched on humility here. Part of this is the humility of understanding that diverse perspectives will value add. And a big part of that is just knowing that you have blind spots and ideally having a rough idea where they are. So there's certain things that I'm pretty good at picking up and there's certain things that I'm pretty lousy at picking up. And being conscious of that and getting people around you who are able to meet those blind spots, having people that you trust and that you have confidence in to be able to value add for you. And whenever you hit a bit of a logjam and they just say, oh, did you think about this? And then you're off and running again. Being able to do that in a way that also reflects to them the value add that they have to your decision-making process and to your leadership processes. That's such an integral part, not just of diversity and inclusion, but ultimately, as James touched on before, getting the best possible outcomes for your organisation.
Thanks, Cliff. Now, Cheryl, I'll ask you to lead off this one. How do communication style differences between genders affect team dynamics, and what can inclusive leaders do to navigate them effectively?
Look, I probably touched on this a little bit in my previous response, but it is clear, whether it's via genders or other people's personalities, that it can significantly influence communication if we allow a more dominant person to be speaking over someone who's fairly quiet. I think, and then misunderstandings can occur because of that. And so it's very, as a leader, we have to be really careful that we don't have that misalignment. So, a directive approach could be seen as dominant and so on and cause friction. I think we need to upfront set clear norms for how we want to communicate. And I used to say to everyone, my mantra was evolution, not revolution. So I wasn't someone that would go in there and stomp my feet and say, okay, this is what's happening. The evolutionary approach, bring everyone on the journey with you and, for a better outcome. I think model active listening, really important. So whether it's in a meeting or it's a one-on-one, so that the person does feel that they're being heard and actually not just being heard, but really listening to what they're saying, because we do want to hear views that are different from our own. And, that's addressing the biases and challenging assumptions that, there's more than one style and everyone has their own different strengths, which we want to, you don't want a team full of people or people that are, that would just say, what you want to hear. You want to get that diverse view. And we heard quite a bit about that this morning. And look, I think just to wrap it up, is fostering an environment where different communication styles are respected and integrated. Leaders can unlock the full potential of their teams, and that drives both inclusion and performance.
Thanks, Cheryl. I love the one about the value of the quieter voice. It's not always the loudest voice in the room. Prue, would you like to add to that?
And thank you. I also love the quietest voice, but I think we always have to listen to all voices. And it's about seeing the person who's speaking and understanding that we're coming from such diverse spaces individually, and you never know what shoes that person is walking in that you are talking to. So the active listening is absolutely key in every conversation that we have. And I think one thing that has been echoed across the panel, but leading with vulnerability. Yes, we are leaders, we have done some and have led great teams, but if you are not listening and not able to accept that you are still on a journey of learning, I know I do that every day. I'm only 6 months into my new job and it's a very different environment, but I even think I go back to the different communication styles that I've experienced when it was defence adjacent. There's a definite space there. But even I go back to when I was overseas in Cambodia, an absolute hard no answer was a nod. So you have to look past the initial first conversation, what's being told to you, and try and understand where that person's coming from, what their lens is. But leading with that vulnerability gives you that ability to learn and adapt. And I think we all have to continue to learn and adapt. And give a power to the insights and the different opinions that come through in having those authentic conversations and really being focused on the people in the room and being able to listen actively is something that I think we all can do every day.
Thanks, Prue. Chris, I'd love to hear your views on this question.
Yeah, I'll maybe come at this a slightly different way. Project management is about building trust and respect. And to have a diverse team, that hits peak performance when you've got trust and respect within the team. But I think the most important part of that is people will look to the leaders, the people that, have the authority, who ultimately might be the delegate and have to make a decision. And they'll look at that behaviour and they will model that behaviour. They will think that's acceptable and that person expects me, to work in that way. So I think the criticality is, as a good leader, you're building trust and respect. You're trying to build high-performing teams, of which, I think Cliff made the comment that there's a lot of literature out there that will say diverse teams will be much higher performing teams at the end of the day. Building that trust and respect, modelling the behaviours you expect of others, that active listening and creating the right culture where people will see that they're able to express their opinion and that will be listened to. And on occasions, making sure your decision-making reflects that, because there's no use them having a say and then finding that it hasn't influenced the discussion or influenced the outcomes. So creating that inclusive culture is about the behaviours that leaders display in those meetings, making sure that you recognise and reward the contribution of everybody and that you take account of that and are seen to be taking account of that. And if you have to make a decision, making it clear why that decision had to be made, because ultimately someone will have that accountability or otherwise. But that active listening, creating that culture, promoting those diversity opportunities, and not letting diversity be stymied at the first step. And you can do that through the way in which you recruit. You can cut out diversity in a heartbeat because you think, I'm going to just narrow it down to this group. And it's the same for conversations. Don't cut people out. Consider them and create opportunity.
And following on from that, Chris, the next question you can lead, please. How can leaders cultivate the skills needed to empower women in project management, talking to a room of them here, and ensure they have equal opportunities for leadership growth?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I could probably talk a long while on this, but, I'll start this in a slightly...
We have plenty of time.
I'll start this in a slightly different way. When I look at project management and CASG, in particular acquisition and sustainment group within defence, we're about a $14 billion business nowadays. We're doing lots of very complex things. The complexity of the projects that we're running has increased by 150% in a decade. So where we would have done 10 now, we're up to 28. And defence is taking on more and more. And as is, industry writ large is taking on far more complex programs. We expect now to be able to deliver faster. We want agile project management, not just classical project management. And we talk about digital engineering and digitisation and a whole range of things. So it can't be business as usual in the project management space. And therefore, it can't be the same traditional thinking about how we do business. And diversity of thought now is going to be critical as we look at adapting classical ways of project management with classical ways of doing our engineering and technical. They won't work anymore. They won't be able to, in the case of defence, we won't be able to respond at the speed of the threat. And we can't afford, delivering to the ADF, we want them to have the best kit as quickly as we possibly can. So for me, diversity now is becoming critical. It's changing the way in which we think about doing business. And that means that we've got to recognise the broader range of skills that people bring to the table, whether it's gender, whether it's ethnicity. All of these things now will contribute to thinking differently around that. And the attraction and retention now becomes critical to keeping people that have to take on these very difficult roles is something that we've got to think about. And you have to create the culture in the organisation that people will want to work for you. They'll want to know that they're going to be valued and empowered to get on and make change and to do things differently and to question norms. You can't do that without diversity. You will always drop back to what you think is easy. And as we're looking at doing things differently in project management, it is now incumbent on everybody to feel empowered, to question what we've done before, to actually look for different ways of doing business, to value the conversations that are had, around a coffee, around a boardroom, all of those sorts of things, because the status quo won't work anymore. And ultimately, the lifeblood of project management is bringing together, diverse teams of different skills, from project management to HR, to technical, to logistics, to finance, all of these things. That's what we've traditionally done. And we recognise in many respects those skill sets. It's now recognising the face behind that and what they bring to the table in different ways. This is challenging times in project management. And diversity is one of the ways in which we will empower people to get on and bring different ideas to the table so that we can respond in different ways.
Thanks, Chris. That diversity in teams is really important. Cliff, can I ask you to respond?
Thanks, Fleur. Agree with everything Chris said. Look, there's a really important dimension, and I'm at a project management conference, so I should use the words project management at least once in one of my responses. Most of your organisations will serve a pretty broad community, and indeed most of your projects will do that. Occasionally you will have a project that's got a pretty narrow bandwidth in terms of its end customer base, but by and large you'll be serving a pretty broad church of people. And so that means when you get to the decision-making moments and the execution moments where you need to get people around a table to hear all the right voices and then to go, this is the decision and this is how we're going to take it forward, you need effectively the diversity of the community that's going to be served by this project to be in that decision-making process. You can have 10 people around a table. If they all think the same way, you don't really have 10 different voices. You're going to get narrow-minded decisions and a narrow-minded end outcome. And Chris is right. Like this is always a challenging moment. You actually need constructive challenge in the room when you're making these decisions, and you need diverse patterns of thought, which are often instructed by diverse lived experience, to actually get to the end game of outcomes that best serve the community that your project is aimed at.
Thanks, Cliff. James, some thoughts from you?
Thanks, Fleur. And I certainly agree with all the comments, and certainly the mindfulness is one that resonates with me. Obviously, being mindful of your actions is critical. And as Chris was saying, we live in a world that's getting more and more complex. So gone are the days that a project was a simple time, cost, scope challenge in meeting all three and obviously satisfying quality. Now that's continuously evolving. So bringing in agile ways of working, I should say, small a versus the big one, as well as making sure that that diversity is there in thinking is going to be a critical skill today as we get more and more complex, or we're delivering in a more and more complex environment. One of the things I like to think about is the difference between intent and behavior. So which do we see out of intent and behavior, do you think? Behavior, I'm hearing. A lot of people have great intentions, and we heard about this morning, but it's that commitment to actually doing that intention, which is what people see, the behavior. But if you think about an iceberg, the behavior is probably one small part of the intent. There's a lot of work, there's a lot of preparation that goes into the intent to do something, which nobody sees. They just don't see whatever's happened. That project hasn't delivered. That person hasn't been engaged effectively. So that's where we've got to be mindful of some of that intent if we're on the receiving end of that, as well as a leader, as a person that's working with others, is making sure that the behavior's there as well. We're doing what we intend to do. A simple principle that we have in PM Logic is making sure we keep our commitments. And sometimes commitments can't be met ultimately. So then it's making sure we communicate as early as possible, because bad news doesn't get better the longer you wait to give it. So we try and make sure from a behavior perspective that we provide, if we don't know, we're not confident something's going to work, we own up early and we take accountability for that. I think when I thinking about the sort of wrapping up the question around how do we motivate and empower women to cultivate those skills, the first one is setting that clear intention. And in PM Logic, we have 5 core principles in everything we do. The first is purpose. So often I find in organizations, and I'll do a lot of project program reviews, and I'll ask individuals, why is this project or program being done? And they struggle to answer that. So that's probably the first one, is making sure there's a clear intent as to why this is being done. The Simon Sinek, for those that are aware of his work, that starts with why. The second then is the measuring progress. So often people are measuring the wrong thing. So, and there's going to be a lot of debate around whether quotas or having that target is correct or not. And there's good things and bad things against each. What we do is we have OKRs, so objective key results. And as a team, we agree, what is the objective? And then we work towards it. And the result isn't necessarily when we get there, it's incrementally. Back to what Chris is saying, it's that agile. How do we make sure we're measuring progress along the way? Those quick wins early on, and then the progress towards it as we go. So from my perspective, that's then helping us to actually get towards achieving those longer term objectives. And then from an actual perspective, we've talked about the diverse recruiting. So I always make sure that I'm promoting, supporting females, probably more than men, and I get into trouble because of that. But in project management, there's a disparity between male, female. So as a positive supporter of females, I try and balance that. From a second perspective, inclusive culture. So we have this thing called proximity bias, where typically what's most important is what you've just heard. And that's just a human bias that we've got. So again, being aware of that proximity bias. We talked about groupthink earlier as well. So groupthink is where we've got similar people making similar decisions, which are probably the decisions they made to end up in the place they're trying to solve ultimately. So bring in that diversity. Mentoring and sponsorship. So we sponsor, for example, universities have capstone projects. So it's a really good way of you getting involved and supporting females in those projects to succeed. And then the final one is training and development. So making sure that you're investing in your team ultimately, giving them schools, giving them the techniques and the skills to improve, and in conversation as well. Ultimately, for me, project management is about communication and effective communication. So We need to teach people to be better at that. And I need to learn to be better at that. We all need to learn. So that's one thing that I believe is a critical skill to help people succeed in their careers ultimately.
Thanks, James. I said that we'd keep us to time and we're ahead of it.
Question.
We might have a couple of questions.
Hi, my name is Myung Bushby. I feel, Chris, I need to say this publicly, but I think we need to stop meeting like this in public forums, in very open, both in professional sense. Thank you for coming. I think it's really great. My question is going to be very left field, and we're talking about the role of women in positions of leadership, and we've spoken very much in the professional environments, in the professional context as well. But I think it's fair to say that all of us here, both men and women, we are leaders outside of work. So I'm thinking, I'm talking in our communities, with our children, within our school communities. In reference to the, headwinds that Prue alluded to before, and in relation to the security briefing that ASIO recently released, and one of the key issues of concern or potential issues of concern is social cohesion. So I hope I can open this can of worms in this forum, but I noticed that in the professions that are represented here today, they are very much what is classically been referred to as hard industries and soft industries, or hard business and soft business. And I would like to share my view in that women in any position where they can speak up and have a voice and be heard, they can be leaders and influencers in their own little communities, and be able to empower others through their actions and behaviour. Because my biggest concern is that in a future scenario, I'm concerned for my in-laws, my father-in-law and my mother-in-law, and the impact of any future conflict and social cohesion that will have, which at a very, I'm really sorry, I should stop doing this. But it comes to the core role of women in our communities, professionally, in our families and in our local communities as well. I think developmental studies have indicated, and research and data has shown that if you educate a mother, she will elevate the financial independence and education level of her household. So on that theme, women in our communities can both educate and increase the financial independence of the household, education level in the household, and coupled with those two things, it provides choices. And choices also lead to empowerment and confidence, and it is that self-perpetuating cycle. So it's probably not more of a question, I'm sorry. It's more of a shared opinion. But the question is, do you think that women have a critical role to play, not in the professional environment, but also in the less sexy or we're not all recognised in the various levels and professions in our lives, but to be able to elevate that and bring that more to the forefront of social consciousness as we're heading into some challenging times.
I'll start. The biggest role model in my life was my mother. And, my dad died when I was 16, and she led me through my life. I wouldn't be where I am today without the values that were instilled in me by my mother. So I get a bit emotional. So I think the role of women in creating those values is so fundamental to society. It always has been, in reality. And now we've got to take it to a different level. I think that's your point. And we've got to recognise the role that women play with a lot more compassion than men, to be quite honest. And I think that ability to keep a family together, in those hard times, which has been what's happened in every conflict we've ever seen, that at the heart is women. We've got to continue to harness that as we're moving forward. But I'm not just suggesting that is in the family life. That goes beyond that. And I think the role that you can play in society, your community, those sorts of things are very critical. And for project managers, those that are, have that skill, that project management skill set helps bring things together with a bit of logic that often is missing, when you look at those. And the area that I'm very interested in is Indigenous project management and supporting, helping create opportunity for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders to learn about project management, to have a role and opportunity in defence, and then to be able to harness that for their community. And I think that the diversity of the majority of that at the moment is happening with women, not with men. I think that's very interesting and we need to do that. But in my personal experience, the best role model in my life was my mother. She created in me that innate culture, and my values that have helped me in my whole life and continue to help me in leading, a big organisation today. And she taught me that, it's not what you say, what's implicit in what you say, it's explicit in what you do. That's the thing. And living the values on a daily basis, which women do better than men in many respects, in keeping the household and, supporting that far more than men do in many respects. That's the lifeblood and that needs to be applied. And when times get harder, that's when it becomes more critical.
Thanks for a great question. Are there any more questions?
Thank you so much for the panel so far. I'm Beck Sweeney. I'm a civil engineer in the Australian Air Force. So my question, noting the diversity and inclusion discussion, I feel like we need to talk about the Trump administration and potentially how that may have impacts here in Australia. So we've obviously talked about all of the benefits, which I fully agree with, being in a very male-dominated workforce. But I suppose my question for the panel, or two questions, do you think that what we're seeing over in the US will impact Australia? And how do you think a change in government may impact this?
I was going to say, on behalf of
can of worms.
Public servants have some limits as to what we can speculate about with respect to the federal election. So I might just go in a slightly different direction, and then leave it to the non-public servants to take the question on a little bit more head on. Kind of a relationship between your question and the first question. I was lucky enough to hear the Governor-General speak on Wednesday morning at the Helen Williams oration. And she talked about the importance now more than ever of care and compassion into how society actually functions. And that's not just care and compassion as it applies in a workplace, or it applies in a community, or it applies in the raising of a family. It is the intrinsic value and often the fact that it is undervalued as a critical dimension of our society. Now, I think, maybe this is Pollyanna of me, but I think Australians are savvy enough to understand that and to hold on to that as a key tenet. Recognising that in the global domain we are a small player, we will be influenced by what we see around us in the same way that people are influenced by what they see around their family. People are influenced by what they see around their workplace. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Australia will be immune to these things. But nonetheless, I am confident in Australia as a pretty well-functioning, cohesive society to be able to sort of stick true to some of those core values.
And I'll just add a bit. I won't comment on the election for good reason, but I will comment on the circumstances. We live in a very complex, ambiguous, contested environment. That's a given. That won't win an election at the end of the day, because people, rightly so, as all of us, would be concerned about cost of living, health, medical, and education. That is the Australian way. But it is a very difficult environment, and made more difficult by some of the things that are occurring, in America or otherwise. But I think, to Cliff's point, we should hold dear to those values that are critical to Australia, that have held us in good stead, through difficult times in the past, and that diversity, noting that that's under fire in the US, still becomes an important thing for Australia. And if we all agree that you get more out of diversity, you create peak performing teams, if you can do that, then that's in our interest to do so, because that will make us more competitive. That will give us greater advantage at the end of the day. So sticking to our values, holding dear to what are our core Australian values, is going to be important. And we will be tested. There will be times when, there are problems with ethnicity. We've seen that just recently. And we're going to have to stand firm to what we believe in, which is that those sorts of biases shouldn't be out there, and we should be championing what is important for Australia and Australia's interests. And our values are core to our interests. They're core to our competitive advantage. They're core to the way in which we can demonstrate and improve the way in which we do business. And I think that we have to stick to those core values, and that will be important as we're moving forward into much more complex, ambiguous and contested environments.
Thank you. We've got about 5 minutes left, so we'll just get some sort of closing key thoughts from our panel, starting at your end, Cheryl.
Look, I might just reiterate, being the non-government person, exactly what you said. I perfectly support, and I just hope like hell that we're strong enough, and our government, whichever side of the fence it falls on, is strong enough to withstand potential negative influences from overseas. And I think we are. I was thinking of, I always used to say the saying, a fish rots from the head, and that's it about leadership. And to be a good, inclusive leader, that will filter down and it create and foster diversity and accountability. Thanks.
I think we just need to continue to have our eye on the ball in terms of, and James touched on it earlier, that conscious rebalancing where you do see, long-standing societal biases in various constructs and having to, consciously redress them and consciously balance things. That job's not done yet, and we need to maintain momentum and real diligence to the task on that front.
Yeah, I think the key here is we should all lead by example. Our values and the way in which we don't just talk about them, that we make them explicit in everything we do is really important. And I'd ask you to just reflect on a couple of things. It's easy to talk about communication. It's easy to, and that's good. It's easy to talk about cooperation. That's a bit better. But how do we actually collaborate? Diversity is about collaboration and partnership. And I think everybody needs to think about what it takes to step from communication to cooperation into collaboration. And collaboration's about a different conversation. It's about risk sharing. It's about walking a mile in someone else's shoes. It's about working together in ways that you've never done before, moving from transactional into transformational and relational. The only way in this project management space we'll be able to do business in the future, to manage complexity, is to adopt different ways of doing business, to have collaboration at the heart of what we do, to have values-based leadership as being important, because it's all about trust and respect. That are the trade goods of organisations that do project management. So leading by example, modelling that. Humility and courage. Knowing what you don't know, valuing other people's opinions, and having the courage now to call out bad behaviour and to apologise when you've behaved badly. Thank you.
I'll follow on and I'll echo the trust that Canberra is built on and that we can all build together. I would also, there is a room full of powerful project leaders here. We have to be able to be it so people can see it, and lifting everyone up together is a key message that we need to come together as a community. I would probably go to the previous question and answer by saying MIACT is hope-focused, and we have to tell positive stories and create safe spaces so we can lift up and empower more women, but bring in more diversity and greater thinking to take on the challenges that we are facing in this world today.
And I think for me, just picking up on the questions as well, so I was unfortunate enough to lose my mother when I was 7. And I think that makes me a big supporter of females as a result. So similar to Chris, but different, because I see the value in mums and what they do, because I didn't have one. And I'm lucky enough to have children, and my wife is a mum, and mums do an amazing job. So if your mum's here, and to your mums, thank you. So for me, that's the important thing, and that's where I was talking about these views on the world. So my view is slightly different to others, but actually I get just as much value from it. The second is Trump. So I think of it from a systems perspective as an engineer. Any change in a system will impact a system ultimately. So yes is the short answer. There'll be obviously negative things, and hopefully there'll be some positive things that come out of it. And pick up on what Chris is saying, I think one of the things, the positive things, is that he is really shining a mirror in front of us as a society at the moment. And so there's no walking away from the situation that we're in today. We've actually got to face up to it and live our values. Probably the third one then is, as project community, it's fantastic to see everybody here today. And I think it's important that these types of events continue. So thank you to AIPM for their support in making this event happen. And again, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to chat to you today. Thank you.
And many thanks to all of our panellists today. What a wonderful, insightful conversation. I encourage you to reflect on what's been spoken about today, but some of my key takeaways, that self-awareness, James, is really important. And Chris, I was going to talk about courage and humility, but as project managers, being the collaborators and bringing people together to solve those problems and deliver the outcomes is really important. And Prue, sort of creating those safe spaces that allow us to do that successfully. Thank you, Karen. I think we're done on time. Thank you, everybody.